you ever lose a set of car keys? How about your glasses? Cell phone? What about a very important piece of paper that you wrote something on and you misplaced it, can't find it? Did you search everywhere for it and still couldn't find it? High schoolers, did you ever lose your homework? Did you check the same pocket 3 times and never find it in any of those pockets? There's probably elbowing going on now between husbands and wives. Because, like all of us, I'm very guilty of it. The fact is, when I was a much younger man, I used to ask my mom all the time, have you seen this? Have you seen that? Do you know where I put this? Her answer was, if I had $1 for every time you asked me, I'd be a very wealthy woman. But now, I'm older and I'm wiser. Right? My wife still says the same thing. Next question is, where did you find it? Think back now, all right? How many times was it laying in plain sight? Right out in the open, mixed in a bunch of stuff on a tabletop. But did you still get so stirred up it just aggravates you to no end? You hung your keys up on the same hook you always hang them on, but somehow they got turned a little bit differently. And they didn't have the right look. All right. Let's get a little closer to home. All right. We're seated with a group of our church members, right? Maybe Georgia asks you to participate in the 150th celebration. Not happening. Well, did you want to melt into the furniture? Kind of hide? Did you look away? Avoid eye contact? Maybe, just maybe, you try to become invisible. And all the while thinking, right, I got so many things to do with school, and work, and home. My home life is just so busy. I just can't add one more thing to my list. Besides, I don't even like the project. I don't do it. But I know John, or Jan, or Mary, they're all so much better qualified than I am. Let one of them do it. They volunteer for everything anyway. They're retired. They've got all the time in the world. And I can guess, I can very much guess, that if I was to trade places with you in the pew right now, I could probably think right now of a long list of all the tasks and things that I was asked to do that I hid from right there while sitting in plain sight. Let me give you another for instance. Pastor McKenna is asking for members of our church now to open our homes to small groups to talk about the future of our church and our family, where we're going to go. Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands to say who did and who didn't. But did anybody think the same way that I did? My very first thought was this. We have got a nice, large home. We can get a lot of people in there. But we also have a large dog. And there are dog hairs floating on the wind continually through the house. No matter how much you clean, no matter how many times you vacuum, you can't find them all. We moved the piano yesterday for the first time in a year. And there was a trash can full of dog hairs hidden behind them and underneath. Tells you how lousy of a vacuum cleaner are. And my second excuse was even more predictable. Jeannie is really busy with work and all the things that she's doing. And Sarah has just started her real estate business, and now, as grandparents, we're being called on to be the soccer grandparents. So my list was completely valid. But perhaps I should have thought again. what I was doing was I was saying no to God. Here I am, Lord, but send Georgia or somebody else. Throughout my whole life, I've developed a keen knack for hiding in plain sight. I've had many opportunities to step up and speak out and do something for Christ. But sometimes these opportunities were really a lot of fun, and I had a great time doing it. And sometimes I ran willingly right to them. Other times, I had to be drugged, kicking and screaming the whole entire way. As many of you know, I was raised in a small congregational church in eastern Washington. Where we grew up, there were lots of opportunities to serve God. From the time of my salvation, when I was 10 years old, until the time that I was going off to college, I was active in our church at home. Music was an easy outlet. My mom had been a church organist and pianist there for 30 years. All my brothers and sisters sang. We all played instruments. So it was really easy to become involved. We were all involved in the youth groups. But when college came, I began to feel the pull of the wide paved road. The one with all of its mysteries and all of its temptations. Suddenly I began to melt back into the crowds, and I found myself hiding. And I had a long list of a repertoire of excuses of why not to seek God or for looking for his place for me. Every now and then, though, I'd come back home when I come out of shadow of hiding, and I'd find something that I liked, and that I would do something that God probably would have appreciated. I felt that little lift into my heart, the one that we all get when we're really doing something in the Spirit and God is filling you. And sometimes that feeling lasted a long time. But there were also times when I began to feel that kind of ebb away a little bit. And I know that I was kind of on that slippery slope, kind of downhill, and all of that, the feeling was ebbing away, and things were changing. So I sat there in all of my comfort, and I shrank back into the shadows, just below the surface, and I hid in plain sight. The Bible is full of folks who attempted to hide from God. They were fearful to become involved for lots of different reasons. They could be mocked, they could be ridiculed, they could even be put to death for following that guy that had created such of a stir just a few weeks before. Standing up and speaking out, basically, would cause a huge, huge stir, especially with the Pharisees, people who were involved in the church. So instead, what they wanted to do, these folks that were running, they just kind of blended back into the crowd, hid in plain sight, as it were. Now Jonah, I think he's fallen down there. Jonah was one of those guys who tried to run from God. In the scripture we read just a few minutes ago, Jonah wanted nothing to do with going to Nineveh. Nineveh was a very, very tough place. There was a lot of sin there, a lot of things going on that God was more than just a little displeased about. And as it happened, the Ninevites and the Jews were bitter, bitter enemies. Besides, Jonah being a Hebrew, being a Jew, what would he have to say? What would they listen to? But God had a message. He was mad, and he wasn't going to put up with any more of it. So for Jonah, this was going to be a very, very tough sell. And I can just imagine, just as Jonah did, he did a lot of serious soul searching. And wouldn't you and I be doing the same thing if you and I were in his place? I have to look back in my own long history and decide that, the sheer weight of my own sins and my own guilt kept me from volunteering and doing a lot of things that maybe I should have done. I can remember times when the distractions of life held so much more greater control over me. Do you have any distractions in your life? Things that kind of come to mind? Here are a couple of questions that I ask myself. What would I have to say that would make a difference? Or, what do you say to the person who knows you? He knows a little bit about your personal history. And he comes up and he says, hey, didn't I see you doing the very same thing that you told me not to do? Why should it be different for you than it is for me? So what does old Jonah do? He gets on board a ship. He tries to sail in the opposite direction, all the while trying to hide amongst the others in the boat. Now keep in mind that Tarshish and Nineveh are actually hundreds of miles apart. I didn't know how far, so I Googled it. 2,500 miles difference. That is a lot of miles of difference. Now, just a couple of weeks ago, as a side note, I drove 1,535 miles one way to our family farm in eastern Washington. At 75 miles an hour, it took me 2.5 days. These guys were rowing a boat. How long is it going to take them to get 2,500 miles? The Bible also says that this space represents the ends of the earth, basically. So Jonah is trying to run to the very, very farthest corner of the earth to get away from God. And evidently, like we read a little earlier, Jonah told the others that he was running from God. And so a long time before the water became rough, they were fearful for their lives as the seas picked up and the wind picked up, and it got really scary. But they also had great memories, and they remembered that Jonah's the guy that told them, hey, I'm running from God. I want to get away from this guy. Now the sailors, they tell me, were of different pagan religions. Many of them. Many different sailors, many different religions. And so while the seas got rough and everything was going on around them, each one of them was praying fervently to their God. To no avail. Things progressed from bad to worse, and now the entire ship is in danger of breaking apart and going down with all of its cargo and crew. So the sailors do something that's very common in that day. They decide to cast lots to see who's the scapegoat and who's to blame. Guess who loses? Yep, Jonah draws the short straw. Of course, meanwhile, at the bottom of the ship, Jonah's sleeping. Doesn't have a care in the world. He's accomplishing his task. He's escaping from God. Or so he thinks. But finally, the ship's captain comes down and finds him sleeping. And they have a little brief conversation. And I can imagine if the boat's pitching up and down, it was a pretty one-sided conversation. He grabs Jonah by the tie, I'm sure. He's got him right by the lapels, and he says, who's responsible for all the trouble on this boat? What did you do to pick your God off? What country are you from, and what are you doing? So Jonah's got one simple answer. I'm a Hebrew. I'm a Jew. I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the earth and the seas. So the captain still got a hold of him. And he says, what have you done? And how are we going to get out of this mess and save ourselves? So Jonah tells us, he says, well, if you throw me overboard, you'll save yourselves. The seas will become calm. Amazingly, the sailors decide we're not going to throw him overboard because that might make somebody else even worse mad. We're just not going to do that. So they start rowing even harder for land. In some place along the way, they decide that they didn't get far enough, and they decided they had to do what Jonah said and throw him overboard. So they give him the heave-ho. Instantly, the seas became calm, smooth as glass. And so they go on off to their destination. Their troubles are over. But for them, the story's got a very happy ending. They realized that the God of Jonah was the one true God that they needed to serve. And so they pledged their allegiance, they pledged their lives, they made sacrifices, and they turned their life to God right there. So as they're rowing off into the distance, Jonah's bobbing around the sea like a cork in a bathtub. A fish drives up, swallows him. Jonah has one of those get right with God prayers. You ever had those before? I have. I've had many get right with God prayers in my life. I know what that's all about. Have you ever discovered that the mountaintop experience that you felt when you were walking in God's love is kind of on fast downhill track? And have you ever had one of those moments where, why me, God? Why are you doing this to me? One of those why me, God moments. So when I've been headed downhill in my own personal experience, I've discovered that God is the only answer. Turning things over to Him, then letting Him lead me back is the only way that things were ever going to get better. So I kind of creep out of the shadows, maybe one foot at a time. I'm not too sure I want to get into this. Or sometimes you go, pretty good opportunity. I'm just going to step right out there. We're just going to do this. But the case is that I submitted myself to God and His plan. And things always worked out. Maybe not the way I intended for things to work out. Do you ever have those moments when you think something's going to happen the way you really want it to happen, and it turns out completely the opposite? It happens. But you know, God has never, ever failed to hold of me. Never. A pastor friend told me one time that if God closes the door, you can guarantee He's got a window open someplace. And if there's not a window open, there's probably a doggy door someplace. So anyway, let's get back to Jonah for a minute, okay? He's down in the belly of the fish, and he is praying as fervently as he has ever prayed in his life. You know, God doesn't appreciate people who turn their back on Him. There is no escape. And Jonah realizes that there's no escape. But Jonah begs forgiveness, and he asks for salvation from that stinky and smelly place where he's at in his life. And guess what? God listened. Now don't think for 1 second that God is not listening to our prayers. He hears every last one of them. If you don't hear anything else that I say today, I'd like you to be sure to take that home, that God does listen, no matter how bad it is, or how bad we think it is. 3 days later, Jonah is, shall we say, deposited on dry land. And God tells Jonah one more time, go give the people of Nineveh the message that I gave you. This time, Joe doesn't waste any time. He all but runs in that direction. He tells the people that God is way beyond aggravated. He's angry, and they had better get right with God. Now, you could read the rest of the story in Jonah 3 and 4. Dare I say, if Pastor lets me someday, to be continued. All right. So now, you're sitting in your seats, all right, and you're wondering quietly, you're glancing at your watches or looking at the back of the clock in the back of the room back there and saying, all right, how is Tom going to tie hiding in plain sight into the story of Jonah? Good question. I'm a former commercial truck driver and charter bus driver. I've driven 3 million safe miles across this United States and Canada. The only state that I've not driven to is Maine. There are no provinces in Canada that I have not been in. That's a lot of miles. But the truck was the way for me to escape. It gave me distance with my church. And truth be known, any church. I hid from church. I hid from church. I hid from being an active part of the family of God. And I was in plain sight to lots of people around me. But nobody knew what I was running from. I was easily distracted by the things that weren't conducive to being a good Christian leader, and it was a place of my complete anonymity. When I was home, I attended church. I melted into the background. I didn't volunteer or attempt to do anything. I didn't sing a note in churches for nearly 3-4 years. Never once. I didn't want the responsibility or the thought, I guess I should say, of answering to God or doing what He wanted me to do. But I discovered that God isn't finished with me yet. I've always thought about standing right here, talking to people just like this. But I was afraid that my own shortcomings and my own past sin would hold me back. I was fearful that somebody would know my past, but I had forgotten that God forgave me from that. We all have a special gift or a talent, and age is not a factor for having that gift or that talent. I'm going to say that again. Each one of us has been given a special gift and a special talent. Age is not a factor for sharing or possessing that gift. How we choose to use our gifts shows 2 things. We're either a shining jewel for Christ, or we're doing nothing more than just hiding in plain sight. I discovered at age 63, God wasn't done with me yet. He didn't want another excuse. All He wanted was my availability. Amen.
Amen.